I mean, how important is the creation of a strong third party to change our political system?
Well, I haven't voted for a Democrat since before 2000, and I mean, I know all of the roadblocks both parties throw up. I watched it with Ralph. It's pretty vicious, including keeping them out of the debate. If you can't raise, hundreds of millions of dollars, you have no media access, so you can draw crowds. Ralph could draw crowds of 10,000 people, but he couldn't ever speak on a televised platform. He was locked out. But I think that I think asking whether it's viable, I think they will make it very, very difficult. But I think the more important issue is that the failure on the left to stand by what it said it believed. I mean, the Democratic Party has betrayed every principle the left claims to support, which is why the self-identified left are a laughingstock. It's why they have no credibility. And Richard Rorty, in his last book, Achieving Our Country, writes about this. He said that what happens is that that hypocritical, bankrupt, spineless, self-identified left becomes hated. This happened in Weimar. It happened in Yugoslavia. And as Rorty says correctly, what takes place is that there's a wholesale revulsion towards these self-identified liberals, but more dangerously to the supposed democratic liberal values that they promote. And that is what feeds these proto-fascist movements, which we saw last week. And so the failure, I mean, we should have walked out on the Democratic Party in 1994 after NAFTA and stood by the working class. And we didn't. And they know it. And much of my family comes out of that lower working class in Maine. And I've seen their communities and lives. And I mean, where my grandparents' house was in Maine, the bank is boarded up. There was a Methodist church that caught on fire and burned. The town doesn't have the money to raise it, so it's just charred embers. I mean, there's methamphetamine labs all over the place. That's what we've done. That's what the Democratic Party has done, and the self-identified liberal class has done, and that's why they hate us. And frankly, we deserve to be hated. Well, I mean, I don't consider myself a liberal, but I totally get that hatred because they continued to speak out of both sides of their mouth. They continued to speak in that traditional feel your pain language of liberalism while putting a knife in the back of these people. And they know it. So the hatred for the Democratic Party is far fiercer because there was a time when, organized labor mattered. It doesn't matter anymore. And that was Clinton, by the way. We have two quote unquote liberal presidents, let's say, of the 20th century who were truly, truly dark figures. One was Woodrow Wilson and the other was Bill Clinton.
So I tried to make the case to people who urged me to always vote lesser of two evils. And I said, Bill Clinton was not the lesser of two evil. And they don't understand. And I try to tell them that it took a Democrat to pass NAFTA, but George Bush the first couldn't pass it. It took a Democrat blue dog to come in and give cover to the other blue dogs to go against the unions. And that's exactly what Bill Clinton and Al Gore did when they started the Democratic Leadership Council, which was a response to Ronald Reagan kicking their ass for 8 years. They decided to, if you can't beat them, join them. And they started the Democratic Leadership Council. And people on the executive board were right from the Koch brothers. I mean, that's who Bill Clinton turned into. He went on to gut welfare while he exploded the prison population, passed NAFTA. And then he went and he deregulated Wall Street, which led to an economic collapse within 10 years. I mean, that's the success. And he did the Telecommunications Act, which now you can't get the truth about anything.
And let's not absolve Biden. Biden was instrumental in all of that.
Yes. So my point is that they're not the lesser of two evil, right?
Well, the problem is that most of the self-identified left, and I live in Princeton, they're all, mostly liberal Democrats. They have no relationships with people who have been victimized by this system.
I know.
And so for them, it's all an abstraction. I teach in a prison. Mm-hmm. So in the early 70s, we had 300,000 people in the prison system. By the time the omnibus crime bill, which Biden pushed through, and Biden used to go around bragging that he'd increased death penalty laws, federal laws, by over 50. I mean, he used to brag about this. The whole militarization of police, that was Biden. Biden shepherded that through. So I come out of that prison, at least half my students, probably more, wouldn't even be there if it wasn't for Clinton and Biden. And the devastation that has visited on them, on their families. And remember, almost half our prison population never committed a violent crime. They're locked up. You got people. I've taught people locked up. They can't get parole. They're locked up for life on drug charges. This is ridiculous. But that's all Biden. And so when you have a relationship with people who their lives have been destroyed, how can you then go out? I mean, I also spent a lot of time in Gaza. I can't betray these people. And the fact is that the self-identified liberal class who pretends that they care about all of these issues through their money, through their support, and through their shaming of people who don't fall into line behind the Democratic Party establishment have completely written themselves out of the political landscape. They have no relevance anymore at all, nor should they.
So what do you see going forward? I see exactly as predicted. The Democrats will be wiped out in 2022 in the House and the Senate, and then they will lose the presidency to a more competent Donald Trump, and unless they lose it to Donald Trump himself. What do you see going forward?
Yeah, Biden is like, if you go back and look at Weimar, so 1932, von Papen takes power, and he wants to bring back the ancien regime, which is exactly like Biden. He wants to recreate the Clinton-Obama era. And it's this kind of conservative utopianism, which isn't going to be achieved. So it does two things. One, it further pushes a huge segment of the population towards extremism because they feel completely locked out. Their voices are locked out by digital platforms. They're ridiculed on mainstream media. They believe, that the election was stolen from them. And the other thing that it does is seed the ground for somebody who can do this with some competence. A Tom Cotton. I mean, these are, Trump. He had the attention span of a 4-year-old. He was utterly inept. He was incapable of organization. He was, to call him a fascist. He had no real ideology. His ideological void was kind of filled by Christian fascism. But I think that, yes, I think that the trajectory as it looks from the Biden administration ensures further misery, further dislocation, especially with the economic fallout from the pandemic, which is already severe. And people, as Barbara Ehrenreich said, being part of the working poor in the United States is one long emergency. That's
yes.
Right. All of that's gotten much, much worse, and I think will get worse. Biden will be far more aggressive in terms of shutting down voices on the left than Trump. There aren't many, frankly, but people like Matt Taibbi, people like Glenn Greenwald certainly will be targeted. Look what happened at The Intercept. There's the perfect example of the bankruptcy of the self-identified left. I was a journalist. For most of my life. And what Glenn did was report the facts. And then when they wouldn't publish his story about the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop, you have interviewed Glenn, so you know all this. What did they do? I mean, he published the traffic. So it was incontrovertible that it was censorship. I read it. What did Betsy Reed and all these people at The Intercept do? They went after him personally. It was really outrageous.
Yes, I know. That's right.
Respond to the facts. It was character assassination. And so I think what we'll see is, especially as things unravel, all of the Silicon Valley, which is essentially tied with the Democratic Party corporate establishment, will be used heavily against the left. I think that the divisions will grow within the country. I think the economic crisis, and who knows when we'll ever get COVID under control. I think all of these will combine to see the rise probably of somebody who, when they carry out something, this wasn't an insurrection, by the way, but when they carry out an insurrection, it'll work. They're there. I mean, there's some very malevolent political figures lurking on the fringes of the landscape, Mike Pompeo, or it may just be somebody we don't even know yet. But I think that's it. I think this is kind of, the game's over. The tragedy is that we weren't able to put, the Democratic Party would have never allow it to happen, but we weren't able to put in a figure like Sanders or others, of course. But the problem with Sanders, he'd be largely paralyzed by Congress. But to push through the kinds of radical New Deal type reforms, although is universal health care radical? I mean, every industrialized country has it.
It's radical to not have
radical.
it.
Our healthcare system is by far the most expensive, least efficient. I mean, it's just so to somehow, that just shows you how pathetic the political landscape has become, that this is somehow controversial or radical type of proposal when it's just normalcy. I mean, I lived in Europe. It's how wealthy industrialized countries should work.
So what people don't realize is that if Joe Biden was a politician in almost any other Western country, he would be an extreme right winger.
Yeah, he would. I mean, the party of war, party of Wall Street.
He's against socialized medicine. That alone would send him to be an extreme right winger.
Yeah.
And people don't, and we have, he's a centrist. He's not a centrist. He's an extreme right winger. He just doesn't tweet as ugly stuff as Donald Trump. Now, let me just ask you before we let you go, people, during this hashtag forced to vote, which I was pushing, people have made the comment to me or point to me that you need to be nice to politicians to get them to do things. People, literally grown-up people, Chris, I'm not kidding, people who speak into a microphone for a living said that you have to be nice to politicians to get them to do things for you. Is there a historical example of this working? And don't you have a story that proves the exact opposite with Henry Kissinger? And
yeah, no, that is that shows that you don't understand power or how it works. And the story, I think I told you maybe one of the times I was on your show, it comes from Kissinger's memoirs, where Kissinger is talking about being in the White House. I think it's 1971. The White House is surrounded by tens of thousands of anti-war demonstrators. Nixon has put empty city buses in a ring around the White House as a protective barrier, and he's freaking out, saying, "Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us." And that's our job, to make sure that's where politicians are. Politics is a game of fear. And the problem is, we as individuals have no power. We organized have a lot of power, and we have the capacity to make power afraid. I covered the revolutions in Eastern Europe. And once that crowd started booing Ceausescu, he and Elena, his wife, couldn't get to the roof fast enough to get on a helicopter. Once I covered the revolution in East Germany, Honecker sends down, the dictator of East Germany, sends down an elite paratroop division to fire on the demonstrators in Leipzig. Leipzig was the epicenter of the protests. They get there, they won't be deployed. Honecker's finished. It is a game of fear. And I think that, yes, the left is incredibly naive. I don't know about the West Coast left, but the East Coast left, they all come out of the same schools, you know. Louis Scooter Libby went to my prep school. You know, the publisher of the New York Times went to my prep school. I was a scholarship student, but I didn't go to prep school. And it is completely incestuous. I mean, that you could hold, with pretty significant numbers, reunions for Ivy League graduates within the New York Times. So they come from the same schools. They run in the same social work circles. This is especially true in Washington. They only talk to each other. They all have a kind of contempt. And I'm talking about the journalists. They all have a kind of contempt for people who don't have their noblesse oblige and higher education and good manners and connections. So they are part of the establishment, especially if you work at the New York Times. You are part of the power elite. We're going to have to make them afraid. We're going to have to organize to make them afraid, because that is the only way they will respond. Getting down on our knees, asking Joe Biden to appoint Bernie Sanders as the Secretary of Labor. I mean, I've just watched Bernie humiliate himself. Since 2016, he was Schumer's bag boy. What was he? The director of outreach?
Yes.
Or, I mean, kind of, but it just meant that he got to stand in back of Schumer for photo ops. Yeah, we have to begin to understand that they serve Goldman Sachs and Raytheon, and that's who they work for. Silicon Valley, Google, Facebook. I mean, look, the last part of the campaign, the airwaves were flooded with anti-Trump message. Was all paid for out of Silicon Valley, completely. Biden was awash in corporate money. So, the only response is to recognize that these people are not going to be reformed. They don't give a damn about what our rights are. I mean, remember that we still remain the most watched, spied upon, monitored, photographed population in human history. And when you are watched 24 hours a day by the government, you can't use the word liberty. That's the relationship of a master and a slave. That's who rules us.
There's no doubt about it. So would you recommend, so pressure and fear is the only thing that works on politicians. All politicians, or even like some people had make the distinction, well, you need to treat corporate Democrats one way and then you need to treat justice Democrats another way. And I said, they have to be even more afraid of their base because there's going to be tremendous institutional pressure for them to move to the right. And we have to pressure them to move left. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, look, politicians, I'm not going to name names. I know a lot of them. Some of them I even like. But I can tell you, every time I see their number pop up on this, I know they want something. But they don't begin by saying they want something. But they don't call me unless they want something. No, it's a very strange and weird kind of human pathology that would make somebody want to go into that profession. I knew George McGovern. He might have been an exception, but most of them really have no ethical base. They shift. I mean, Biden has no core, no real belief system. He just, he moves with whatever the currents are. The political class throughout history has been held in check by well-organized and even militant popular movements. That's just incontrovertible. And as Howard Zinn points out in The People's History of the United States, all of the opening, I mean, we built a closed system, the white slave-holding elites and you read the Federalist Papers, they were terrified of especially direct democracy or popular democracy, and all of the movements, the abolitionists, the suffragists, the civil rights movement, the labor movement. We had the bloodiest labor wars in the industrialized world. Hundreds of American workers were murdered. That is what opened the democratic space. And those movements alone, if we don't recover those movements and rebuild them, and they're never going to be built within the confines of the Democratic Party, then we are going to, as we already are moving very swiftly, towards this kind of corporate totalitarianism with the censorship imposed by, as it already is being imposed by these huge media platforms that can control the ability of literally at this point, I guess, billions of people to communicate.
Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.